Autism can show up in many ways, and no two kids look the same. I want to share some of the most common patterns that I've seen with real examples from my own kids.
Raising neurodivergent kids is messy, beautiful, and a lot. I'm Mary Ellen Yates, and this is Growing Together, Neurodiversity at Home. Let's figure it out together.
Okay, let's get started. I want to remind you, there's a saying out there that if you meet one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Everyone can be very different. It's a spectrum. Everyone can fall in different areas on that spectrum. Even with people in the same family, they can be very different. So I'm going to demonstrate that with my kids. But also, I'm going to go into a deeper dive later in some other videos where you can really see our journey and how it looked different for them. I also want to point out that my children have been labeled or diagnosed as level 1 and level 2. So the needs of your children and their strengths and weaknesses, those things are also going to play a factor in what they experience and what you observe as a parent. So what are some real world signs of autism in your children, and not just the stereotypical list that you often find? Hyperfocus or intense interest. So this can look different than someone with ADHD. A lot of times with ADHD, they will hyperfocus and they have a hard time switching focus. They've finally gotten rid of all the distractions and are deep diving into whatever they're working on. It's very hard to come out of that state and come and go do something else. Where with autistic individuals, they don't necessarily experience that. They just really like to spend their time doing the things that are of high interest to them. So they can switch and go to something else and then come back to it. They just spend a lot of time doing those things. But they might give you pushback if you're trying to get them to transition, because you might be asking them to do something super boring and they don't want to be bored and they don't want to leave that special interest. So the reason for them having a hard time transitioning isn't necessarily that they can't switch focus, but it might be that what you're trying to get them to do next is not interesting to them. Now, I find with autism and ADHD, I feel like their brains are sponges with their special interests. They learn so much information so fast, and they learn all the vocabulary and just so much information and so much details about those things. And they really become experts in those topics. So some stereotypical interests are dinosaurs or trains. And my kids were definitely interested in those. But then you might have a girl and their interest might be less obvious and more culturally accepted. They might be into crafts, or they might be into pop culture, or they might be into horses. I also want to point out that these interests can evolve with time. They don't always have to be dinosaurs forever. As they grow older, interests might change. Bakugans have been popular, and Pokemon will be popular for a while. And it was especially interesting with my second child. He was very, very into dinosaurs. And as he learned more about dinosaurs, then it became an interest in all prehistoric animals. So then he started studying megalodons and woolly mammoths and all those things. He started getting very interested in those, especially liked the megalodon because that was like a shark. So then he started studying more sharks and he was interested in those. And then his interest evolved into all aggressive type marine animals. Then he started being interested in aggressive land animals as well. So now his interest is pretty much any aggressive animal. It doesn't matter if they're still alive today. And also he's very interested in battles with these animals. So he'll often pair up two animals and battle it out by himself to see who the winner is. But he also likes to watch YouTube videos on animal battles as well. And he will mix it up with prehistoric and animals today. There's tons of those videos out there, which I never knew there was this niche until my son. Autistic kids can have unusual play patterns. One of these common ones is lining up your toys versus doing pretend play. There was a perfect example a couple of weekends ago of this where my second son had a gold mining party. He's very interested in gold right now. And so after the party, my two sons were digging up the rest of the treasure that was buried in the sand. And I noticed how they organized all of the gems by what they were. So the gold coins were in a section, and the rubies were in a section, and the diamonds were in a section, and they had them all organized. And so then when they're playing with them, they often organize them, but they don't necessarily like play a treasure hunt game or use them to buy things or things like that. Also, my oldest son was very industrious from a very young age. He liked to do actual things. He would help me around the house with chores as much as he could for a little kid, but he always wanted to be involved in doing things. And he didn't learn to pretend play until much later. He was around 2.5, and my parents got him a play kitchen. And he thought the kitchen was broken at first because the pepper shaker, nothing came out. It just, he's like, why isn't it coming out? Why isn't the pepper coming out? Or the faucet, there wasn't real water coming out. He's like, what is this? It's broken. And so we had to explain to him he was more of a doer and liked to actually do functional things versus playing. But over time, he did learn, and he still plays today. They'll often play the same scenario over and over again instead of pretend play where the situation evolves and changes as you're playing, like racing cars down a track over and over again, or a train around a track over and over again, or playing Bakugans and doing the battling over and over again. They may prefer an object over playing with a person. My second son also did not like to be alone. He always liked to be around people, but he didn't necessarily play with them. So when he was playing with his dinosaurs, he would be around me, but he didn't want me to pick up a dinosaur and play back with him. He wanted to use the dinosaur and have it walk up my head, or walk along me, or crash into me, or things like that. He didn't want me to interact and disturb what he was doing for his play. But I do think siblings were very helpful, because over time, my older son was able to teach him how to play. But I did notice when there were other kids around, my son usually would play near them, but he didn't play with them, or he would play running games like tag with them. But once the kids were evolving into playing some kind of more pretend play or some more sophisticated type of game, my younger son would often wander away and do his own thing. Or sometimes with play, they may not understand the social rules, like taking turns. And if they want to do something, they're just doing it. There was these play gyms, and there was these two boys that was using this thick, large rope, and they were climbing it. And my son decided that looked like fun, and he was going to do it too. So he just started climbing the rope and then started climbing on the kids, not realizing that he needed to wait his turn. And so those kids started yelling at him, and then they were starting to pull on him. So I had to come and remove him from the situation. But he really just didn't understand. Sensory sensitivities can be a real big one. And sometimes you might not even realize that it's a sensory sensitivity. They're just refusing to do things that involve that sensory item. And sometimes it takes some investigative work to figure out what's going on. My oldest son is especially sensitive to sound that he is not producing himself. If he's producing sound, it doesn't bother him. But when other people are producing sound, it's quite distracting. He gets quite irritable. At church, he often has to wear earmuffs because the singing can be too loud, some days to the point that he's crying, or he feels like he has to leave the room, or flee the room almost. Then other days he's fine. So it can vary day to day. There can be meltdowns with textures of clothing. My oldest really likes to be in very comfortable clothes. He doesn't like things fitting tight. So he's often in athletic wear or sweatshirts and things with a lot of things with elastic bands. This can bother them at times. The nice thing about nowadays is there are a lot of tags that are just printed on the clothing themselves, and those don't bother them. My kids are also pretty obsessive with blankets. They like the really soft, fuzzy blankets, and they all have to sleep with a fuzzy blanket touching them, and they might have another blanket over them for the weight. I recently bought hand towels for their bathroom, and one of my sons kept bringing all the hand towels into his room to sleep with because he liked how soft they were. One of my sons squints a lot in bright light, and that same son is pretty sensitive to smells and to food textures. He does not mix his food. So casseroles and soups are out. If I can have a deconstructed meal, I do that often. Tacos are a good one where he can just pick what he wants. Or if they're doing a casserole, because that's what we feel like having, or a soup, We always make sure that there's some leftovers from another meal that we know our son will eat. So we have to be creative and always keeping in mind foods that he deems are safe for him. And I know there's a lot of people out there that think, kids will eat if they're hungry. And I might have thought that in the past, but these kids, they'll starve themselves. They will not eat no matter how hungry they are. It's just an accommodation that we've had to meet. And once we made that accommodation, it made our whole household's lives way easier. But I also have a boundary with that. And I do not make multiple meals to accommodate each person. I make a meal that everyone can have something from. And if I can just leave the sauce separately, then I don't think that's a big deal so that everyone can eat it the way they like it. So communication quirks is often a category that's looked at to diagnose autism. Some common ones are echolalia, or a branch off of that would be scripting or being very literal, unique speech patterns or rhythms to how they speak, and delayed speech. Both my sons had delayed speech. They started speech therapy at 2, but they weren't speaking until almost 3. And they are still in speech therapy. Now, echolalia would be repeating words. So, for instance, if I said to a kid, he is your friend, and they would say, friend, friend. When kids are younger, you might not pick up on this because often a lot of young kids, they repeat those content words as they're learning vocabulary and stuff. But as they get older, it's more obvious that they're still repeating those words. Another thing that they might do is scripting, where they have heard a phrase or a whole dialogue or a word in somewhere else, like in a book or in a movie, and they use that as part of their communication or when they're talking. So, for instance, I myself will do this sometimes with lines from movies, especially Princess Bride. There's a lot that my husband and I use, but also from my favorite board book with my kids, I Love You, Stinky Face. So whenever my kids say, I love you, Mom, I always say, and I love you, my wonderful child. That is one of the phrases that they use in the book. One of my sons often repeats phrases that he's heard his therapist use. They're also very literal. So understanding puns and jokes takes a while to understand. And they get it later on as they're learning more and more vocabulary. My second son, he loves to laugh. And so jokes have always been very important to him. So a lot of times he would tell you a joke and it's like, why did the megalodon eat the fish? And then he was like, because he was hungry. But now that he's gotten older, he is starting to actually tell jokes that have like a punchline, which has been fun to watch the evolution of it. They also might use pretty advanced vocabulary, especially if they have special interests that have tons of really good long words. And so people will be very impressed, but then they're surprised by the difficulty in them carrying on a conversation. So often the conversation is one-sided, where they'll just keep telling you all about their facts. Or one of my sons will often even just be talking to someone, but he's walking around, pacing around the room, but he's actually talking to someone, but no one knows who he's talking to because he hasn't addressed them. He's not looking at them. And so that can be tricky too. So oftentimes we're like, who are you talking to? Another one is eye contact. This is often one that's one of the stereotypes. It's not as black and white as it might seem. With all my kids, I breastfeed and we're pretty physically affectionate. They're climbing on us all the time. They're hugging us. And so, especially with my second son, he was looking at me and we were having eye contact. I kept dismissing autism because I'm like, no, he has good eye contact and all these things. But then my husband brought up, he's like, he doesn't always look at me though. And I also noticed that in a lot of pictures, he doesn't look at the camera. He's always looking off to the side. So it might not be quite as obvious, especially with caregivers, but it might be more obvious to strangers and other people in the community. People with autism, they can have rigid routines and have a hard time with change. And they can often be pretty organized too, because they like to play organizing their stuff and they like to do things a certain way. And so meltdowns can occur when things are not going the way they want it. Sometimes it's really hard to be flexible. My 2 middle children, they share a room, and my husband and I usually both go in there and lay with each of them for a couple of minutes and switch. And they usually tell me their happy and sad part of the day. That ritual of laying with him is very important, and he doesn't like either of us to switch. And sometimes I might be on the couch and say, okay, you want to just tell me your happy and sad part here? He's like, nope, you need to come lay with me. He wants it to be done the way we always do it. Motor differences, especially with my second son, as he got older, this became more obvious. Started noticing more after the 3-year mark that my second son started toe walking a lot. And this was one of the big things that was making me think that there maybe was some diagnosis in there. First, it was just he would pace in circles. He would toe walk during that time, but a lot of times he was still flat footed. But as he got older, he was toe walking more and more. And for a while, too, he would keep his hands up, too. So he looked like a little T-Rex. And since he loved dinosaurs so much, my husband and I thought it was really cute. He was getting calluses on his feet and starting to have damage to his toenails because he was toe walking. Toenails would split from his nail beds. So he started losing balance more. I noticed he was spilling more because he was trying to toe walk and carry things. He was also pretty clumsy. He was always injuring either his head or his toes. And so at this point, he's in physical therapy because he was toe walking. So different muscles got stronger and other muscles got weaker, especially in his core. Toe walking can be normal for young kids. Usually before 3, it's considered normal, but then after 3, it's something that might need to be looked at by a professional to see if there's something else going on. A common stereotypical motor difference can be some stimming behaviors such as spinning or hand flapping or pacing. My second son does the pacing and climbing while he's pacing. These are usually coping strategies they use to help self-regulate themselves. Other people do things that are not as obvious, like maybe wiggling their toes or twiddling their thumbs or playing with their hair a lot. There's many different things they may do. They can have some difficulty with fine motor skills. Occupational therapists can work really well with this. This could be like zippering and buttoning and writing, scissor skills and pencil grip. My 2 oldest, the scissor skills and pencil grip were especially hard for them. I do want to point out that there could be another diagnosis called dyspraxia, fine motor coordination planning difficulties. I personally feel like my second son has this, but we have not gotten a diagnosis for it yet. There can be a lot of quiet or subtle signs of autism too. And I think a lot of these are why we're hearing about a lot of people getting diagnosed later and later in life. Some of these are just being a quiet individual. Like they stated themselves, they're quiet, they're not causing any issues in the classroom, but they may be sensory overloaded, but they're not saying anything and they just keep the struggle that they're having internalized. And some of these kids can be this perfect kid in one situation, like school, and then they get home and they're just having meltdowns because they haven't been self-regulating all day and they've been so sensory overloaded that they're just done by the end of the day. Second son can be either very loud, but also very quiet. And so a lot of times he seems like he's a good kid behaving because a lot of times if he's overstimulated, he just goes off by himself and goes and plays, or he'll go and start drawing somewhere. But for a while when he was younger, he was just slipping away while in public and he wouldn't respond to his name in public and he would just go to a quieter spot in these high stimulation areas. And so this was really scary and not something we expected at first because my first son always stayed with us. He always had to see us. He was very anxious about being left behind for whatever reason. And then my second son, when we were home, he never went out a door without permission, never tried to escape. So it wasn't something that was really on our radar. So that was scary for a little while until we figured out strategies to deal with that. Some kids that are highly verbal and that are good at academics can fall through the cracks. I felt like my second son, I was blown off a lot. We were in Germany, so that was part of the issue, but we were blown off a lot when we were going for evaluations and stuff because it was obvious that he was intelligent, he understood, he would follow directions, and they were only seeing him in these small settings and not seeing the big picture because oftentimes, especially when he was younger, he wasn't toe walking in public. It was only at home when he was excited. I mean, that gradually grew more and more. And so these kids that seem like they're fine because they're quiet or they're intelligent or they're not having issues academically, people are like, oh, well, they're fine. Or, oh, well, there's so many other kids that have so many harder problems. But that's not fair because this person is an individual that is having their own struggles and have their own needs that need to be addressed so they can be accommodated. But like in some ways, for my older son, it was easier to get him help because he had learning struggles. So it was very obvious that reading was very difficult for him and math was very difficult for him. So we instantly qualified for some services. But since my second son didn't have those difficulties, he was often just swept aside. Oh, he's fine. Some other subtle signs can be masking. So, as parents, we teach our kids how to interact with the world. We might do these little things to show them how to interact in our world. And so then when they go to a provider, they're like, oh, well, they're doing this, this, and this, but it might be something that they were taught and not something that's natural for them or that's even easy for them. They might be doing it because their parents told them to, but it might actually be something that's really hard for them because we don't know what's going on for them internally. Another part too is girls often tend to fall in line with societal norms more and they often get missed too. Their signs can often be a lot more subtle. I feel like as a kid, since I didn't have learning struggles and I was quiet and I would just always find my own things to do because I hated being bored, that I was overlooked for stuff that was going on with me that now as an adult I'm trying to figure out for myself. But another type of masking could be another diagnosis that is hiding diagnosis too. With my oldest son, his ADHD traits were very strong. He's very impulsive. He's distracted. He has a hard time holding attention. Those things are very obvious. And so I'll share more about his journey later. It took us a while to figure out that he also had autism because those ADHD characteristics masked it so much. I hope I've given plenty of examples of what autism could look like for your kid. And I hope I've also shown that it can look very different for different people. Stay tuned for my next videos that take a deeper dive into each of my kiddos' journeys with autism. Have you seen any similar traits with your children? How did you know that your child was neurodivergent? I would love for you to share your stories in the comments below. And please like and subscribe down below if you haven't already. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye.